Hello, folks on Zoom. We currently have 2 people in person, 5 people on Zoom. It's a very light day. Which is sad because today I think is one of the days that'll probably help you the most, because we're gonna talk about careers in psychology. But each person's gotta do them. So I'm just gonna go ahead and check in those of you who are here. Alrighty. Yep. Good. All right. So on Monday, I will be distributing exam 4, so do plan to be here in person. And then 1 week from today, you'll be doing your poster presentations. Probably on Monday, I will have a folder set up, a Google Drive folder that y'all can just put those in so that we can go through stuff pretty quickly. And so I'll walk you through that on Monday, distribute the exam, and then that'll be it until your presentation's on Friday. Your presentation for your poster is very short. You're just gonna walk us through and make sure you hit on all the big things, and your syllabus has the rubric I'll be using to score you on both your poster and your presentation of your poster. So if you're like, what is Dr. Myers gonna use? It's right there. So you know what I'm looking for. Well, but today is our last day of lecture. And like I said, which units are exam 4? Good question. Everything since exam 3. It's not cumulative. So it is everyday living and understanding social behavior, everyday living, and reflections on thinking like a scientist. So it's basically the back page of your syllabus. And that's it. It's not cumulative. Good question. And same thing, you'll get it Monday, it's due Friday to me in person, take home, open book, open note, not open friend. But it'll be the same format for all the other exams, no surprises. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and share screen with our sound. And yes, that's a good question. Everything is due next Friday. So next Friday, since it's your exam time, that is your turn in everything for the semester. PECs, your perusals, any assignments you might have missed, you can contact me, or I think the vast majority of them are posted on Blackboard. Okay, so yeah, that is sort of your, I don't like using the word drop dead, but that's your last possible time to turn stuff in to me is a week from today, since that's our exam time. Great question. Thank you for bringing that up. All righty. Now, just a sec. There we go. I didn't want to react for a second. Okay, so this is where we left off on Wednesday. And again, everything on here is good, except you're not a psychiatrist if you're a PsyD, you're a clinical psychologist, just like you are with a PhD in clinical psychology. To be a psychiatrist, you need to have an MA, a master, medical doctor degree. Medical degree? I think it's just medical degree. Which is technically a master's degree, not a doctoral degree. But I've nothing against doctors at all. It's just funny when people are like, we shouldn't call Jill Biden Dr. Biden because she's not a medical doctor. And it's like, well, the first people who were called doctor were people with doctorates, right? So yes, we should call people by their titles. Alrighty, so this kind of breaks that down more. And for folks on Zoom, well, maybe since more of you are on Zoom today, I'll just kind of stay sitting and use the mouse instead of my hand to walk folks through things. And so as I just mentioned, a psychiatrist, and this has weird stuff about the state of California, just because that's the resource I got this chart from, but it would be similar in other states. So, if you're going to be a psychiatrist, you're going to go get an MD or a DO. A DO as opposed to an MD is just more holistic, but you get the same training. And then these folks would then, after you get your medical degree, go and do a residency in psychiatry. So they'd go through the exact same med school as anybody else, as your surgeon, as your general practice, family practice doctor, as your pediatrician, right? And then afterwards, they specialize in their residency. And so a psychiatry residency is anywhere from 3 to 5 years. If you want to be, so this is, you've done 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, and then 3 to 5 years on top of that. If you want to be a child psychiatrist, it's going to be more those 5 years, because you have to learn at what age can you give what medicines, right? You don't want to be poisoning children. These folks are mostly going to be doing diagnosis and prescribing, and they can work either inpatient or outpatient or a combination. Some do psychotherapy, and in fact, in the past, it was much more common for psychiatrists to do psychotherapy. And in fact, when I was on both my placement in graduate school and my residency or internship year as a PhD, we worked with psychiatry residents who were learning to do therapy. So there are definitely still some places that train people to do therapy. That being said, a lot of psychiatrists don't do therapy because they typically can get reimbursed more for a 15 to 20 minute med check than they can for doing an hour of therapy. So just economically, right, it doesn't make that much sense. So then they are going to be working with other mental health professionals. So they would be the prescribing person, and the other mental health professional would be the one administering therapy. Now, if you're going to be a psychologist, you get a PsyD or a PhD. And a PsyD is just a doctorate in psychology. I think I have some slides coming up explaining the difference between these two. But essentially, a PsyD is more applied. A PhD, you're learning more about data. But in both, particularly if it's a clinical psychology one, you're going to get trained in how to do therapy. So these folks can also do diagnosis. They can do psychotherapy. And the purview of clinical psychologists and those they supervise is psychological testing or assessment. This is our wheelhouse. We developed the assessments. We know how to give them. And people with PhDs or PsyDs can own a private practice, but typically they're going to be in larger institutional settings. So like me, I'm a PhD in clinical psych. I teach at a university, right? They might teach at a larger research-based university. They might work at a teaching hospital in like a department of behavioral medicine. Or they might be working at like a VA center, things along those lines. Typically, to be a therapist at a VA, you do need a PhD or a PsyD. Now, that being said, while I was on my internship year, I had supervisors that had both, and they were not treated any differently. One of the main differences is financial. Because a PhD is a scientific model, typically your schooling is paid for. PsyD is a professional school model, which means you pay out of pocket. And so people who finish PsyDs are typically 100K or more in debt, unfortunately. You can be a marriage and family therapist, and there are specific master's programs that train you to do this. And then you can get an MFT or these various licensures as well. Sure, Elijah, go ahead and ask your PsyD question. You can either unmute or type it in the chat, whatever's easier.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So, if you, I don't know if I heard you correctly, but if you were to pursue a PsyD instead of a PhD, they don't, you're saying they don't usually give out scholarships for that?
Correct. So
And
I
don't
have,
you usually need an advanced degree first, like a master's in psychology or something like that, before you were to pursue a PsyD, or is that PsyD that advanced degree?
that's a good question. So PsyD and PhD you can do without a master's.
Hmm.
For a PsyD, I don't know if you get a master's on the way. Some PhDs you get a master's on the way. So like in my PhD, the first 2 years, I was technically in the master's program. And then once I defended my master's thesis, I was then a PhD student, but I didn't stop, right? It was called a non-terminal master's. Yeah, I don't think for PsyDs you need to get a master's first. Some PhD programs now, people are getting a master's first just to make them
Hmm.
more competitive when they apply.
And like, would you say that either is more corollary to a specific line of work, or
Yes, definitely. Actually, let me see if I have this other slide I was talking about. Yeah, here we go. So, what you're looking at if you're going to be doing a PsyD is to be doing clinical work. So you'd
yeah?
be in a teaching hospital, at the VA, things along those lines.
Hmm.
The PhD, you can do any of that, but then it also opens more doors in terms of being able to teach and do research. Typically, people with PsyDs are not taught to do research. I
Right.
did have a friend when I was on internship who was in the PsyD at Stanford. As you can imagine, Stanford has different standards than other places,
Hmm.
right? And so she did have to do a database dissertation, but she didn't really get training on how to do it. Whereas, like,
Okay.
from day one when I was on campus, I was being trained in research by my PhD supervisor. So yeah,
Cool.
yeah, very
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Let's see. Oh, good. Daryl's finding this helpful too. Yeah, I think actually let me just do it real quick while I'm thinking of it. Like the next time I teach this, I'll put the PhD versus PsyD slide above these other two, just because I think it's so confusing. People are like, what the heck is a PsyD? PsyDs are pretty new. I want to say they're only maybe 30 years old. It could be a little longer than that.
And
Um,
actually, like one more follow-up question, if that's
sure.
cool. But like, will this slideshow? I know you record them, and like I know we have access to them while the course is going on. But if I were to want to refer to this like later on, would there be somewhere that I could find it?
Good question. You can download it, or I can
Okay.
always send you the link. I
All
think
right.
after a certain amount of time, they close the Blackboard page to you, but it
Mm-hmm.
lives on my Google Drive, so that link will always work, or you can download
Okay.
it for yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Other questions about PsyD versus PhD? Again, this is very confusing, and it's not something that a lot of people know about. I certainly didn't know about this as an undergrad, to be perfectly honest. I hadn't even heard of a PsyD, so I didn't even think about applying to PsyDs. PsyDs, I should also say, are typically easier to get into. They often have a lot more spots. So like there might be 20, 50, even 100 people in an incoming class for a PsyD program. Whereas like my clinical PhD program was pretty big and there were 11 of us our first year. Unfortunately, we dropped down to like 9 at some point. But PsyDs, like I said, are pricier, but easier to get into. And if you're thinking you want a doctoral degree, but you don't want to do research, it is an option. In terms of what Elijah was asking about stipends, so I do have a student who graduated from Regent's PsyD program, and she got a stipend, but it was only $1,000 a semester, as opposed to like my full tuition was paid, plus I was paid, I want to say like $14,000 a year to work for the department, which I fully recognize is not much, but in Kent, Ohio, you could survive with that, right? Were I in New York City or even here, I would have had to take out loans, but I was able to not take out loans because I was in a place where the cost of living was really low at that time. And granted, this was like the aughts, but I was able to rent a 2-bedroom place for $625 a month, which is like unheard of here, right? So that's something else to kind of think about, is like, where is the place and what is the cost of living, right? So in both the PhD and PsyD, you're going to get coursework and clinical experiences. So for us, we started doing clinical work our second year. They really wanted us to get training under our belt first. But in some PsyD programs, they have you hit the ground running. So I had a student who did a PsyD program in Pennsylvania. Her very first semester, she was doing clinical work with inmates. And like, that just felt really weird and like throwing someone into the fire to me. And those clinical experiences are often, at least start in a training clinic housed within the psychology department, where it's kind of like our counseling center. You see a lot of students, but you also might see community members. And then you get placement experiences throughout your graduate program out in the community, sort of to match with what you're interested in. And then the final year of either a PhD or a PsyD is a required APA accredited internship. And that's what I refer to as my residency sometimes. And for that, you typically have to move. You apply and are matched through the exact same computer system they use for medical residencies. And so it's sort of like you pray to the giant computer in the sky that you get matched. The match rate's been pretty good lately. There was a time in like the 2010s where it was not great. So again, yeah, as we were just talking about, if you get a PhD, you're probably going to end up being a professor, an academic researcher, a licensed psychologist in one of these larger settings. And then if you're going to do a PsyD, you're more likely to kind of focus on being a licensed psychologist, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't do some sort of training, right? You could teach in a PsyD program. You could work at a place that trains interns. So like some of my supervisors were PsyDs when I was at the VA, for example. And then also on this chart is the MSW, where you get coursework and clinical experience, and then you're really focusing in on mental health. And what's nice about social workers versus clinical or counseling psychologists is they get a lot more training in connecting people to resources, right? Part of their job, in addition to being a therapist, is let's hook you up with this. Let's network you with this to help people get through. A master's in social work is typically 2 years. PhDs in clinical psych in particular take 5 to 8 years. If you're doing an experimentally based PhD, it might be shorter, more on the 4 to 5 year. PsyDs are 4 to 6 years because you're not spending as much time on research, and you can see the median salaries for each. So yeah, I like that I moved that earlier, just because that's a confusing thing. So we just talked about social workers. And so you can get various accreditations based on your licensure, the type of degree you have. And as I just mentioned, those folks do diagnosis, they do therapy, and then they connect individuals with various social services. You can be a professional clinical counselor. In this state, you're typically an LPC. Looks like in California, they add another C. And these folks will have a master's in counseling or clinical psychology, have hours, supervised hours, sit for an exam to be licensed. And they also can do diagnosis and therapy. And then you can be a licensed educational psychologist. These are folks who work within the schools. And a lot of what they do, as you see here, is testing. So a lot of people think educational psychologists are the one who are going to be like school counselors. Typically, no. Typically, an educational psychologist, your job is assessing. So you're assessing for learning disabilities, ADHD, even for giftedness, things along those lines. All right, and then the other distinction, which you've kind of heard me talk about a little in here, right, is the distinction between counseling and clinical, right? You can get a PhD in both. I don't if there are PsyDs in counseling. I think the PsyDs are all in clinical, but I could be wrong about that. There, as you can see, there are more programs that do the clinical PhD, but there are certainly plenty of programs that do the counseling PhD. If you're interested in counseling psych in particular, ODU right across town actually has one of the top PhDs for counseling in the country. So, looking locally, not a bad thing. In terms of the things that we talk about, people in counseling are going to focus on normal developmental issues or problems across the lifespan, whereas clinical psychologists are going to be looking at psychopathology assessment, treatment, manualized therapies, particularly within programs. So like these programs can have different like training models. The one I was in was a clinical scientist training model. So the idea is you really focus in on the science. And so you focus in on evidence-based treatments. We tend to see fewer students of color in clinical PhD, even like applicants, which is sad. That makes me, upset. And I hope that we do a lot to fix that. So a lot of people who go for their counseling PhD already have a master's in counseling or clinical, and maybe have even been practicing and then decide they want to go back and get their PhD. A lot of folks who want to do the PhD, they'll either come, well, it's becoming less and less likely that you come right out of undergrad, unfortunately. A lot of folks will do a PhD prep master's program where you just focus on research for a couple years, or this post-bachelor, we call it post-bac work experience, where you go and you work in someone's lab, you get paid, but get research experience that way. Academic location, counseling programs are typically in the College of Education at schools, whereas clinical PhDs are typically within the College of Arts and Sciences in the psychology department. So typically when you get, it depends on your counseling. Some counseling psych people will get a PhD, some will get an EdD or an EDD, depending on what it grants. In terms of the training model, we see scientist practitioner or scientist practitioner advocate in counseling psych. And here we see scientist practitioner or clinical scientists for PhDs. So they talk about skill development and research and clinical practice for counseling PhDs. And in clinical PhDs, maybe research a little bit more, although I certainly got plenty of clinical training. The faculty is unfortunately largely male still. As you can see, it's getting closer to 50%. That's largely a factor of our field having been very male dominated for years. So the only other person in my extended family to get a PhD, I actually didn't find out till I was almost done because he's like a distant cousin of my dad. He also has a clinical psychology PhD. Weird genetics, I don't know. And when he was in school in the 70s, his class was 9 men and 1 woman. And when I was in school in the aughts, my class was 9 women and 2 men when we started. So it's really flipped. And so I hope we see that like gender equity sooner rather than later in terms of professors. Within counseling programs, they endorse humanistic, family systems, psychodynamic orientations. You'll also see that more in PsyDs a lot of the times. Whereas clinical, you're going to look at cognitive behavioral, other types of interventions that have a lot of research behind them. So in clinical PhDs, there are practicum sites that are more diverse. Oftentimes with counseling PhDs, you're in counseling centers, right? And there's a lot of emphasis on assessment and manualized treatment. You publish more in the clinical PhD. I thought this was really interesting. I'd never seen this before until I found this graphic. So the counseling psych degree actually grew out of the division of APA that focuses on vocational psychology. So people with either masters or PhDs in counseling psychology get training in career development and career skills and management and assessment. I have none of that as a clinical PhD. And there's this industrialization or efficiency focus of scientific study of factors affecting job performance. And we see sort of post-World War II job training and counseling for veterans, and that really got counseling going. Clinical psych came out of the medical field, wanting to treat psychiatric disorders. It's been around longer, and it's studied mental health disturbance. So with counseling PhDs, you're looking at more healthy populations like college students or outpatients. In clinical PhDs, you're more likely to work with different populations, more severe psychopathology. So again, my focus is on eating disorders, which really should be classified as a severe mental illness in my mind. In terms of practice, we see looking at health across the lifespan. Oh, sorry, theoretical orientation. We see client-centered, humanistic, things along those lines. I don't know anyone psychodynamic in current PhD programs, so I guess it happens. A lot of people are CBT, DBT, mindfulness-based, a lot of that. So in counseling, what you're doing is you're looking at overall health across the lifespan. And in clinical, you're really more looking at people with pathology, right? People would come to you when they have severe problems going on. You're doing that assessment and treatment. It's really a healthcare perspective. And again, engaging more in those pathology assessments where you do more career or vocational assessments as a counselor. So these folks will work in college counseling centers, and again, clinical psychologists are probably more likely to work in hospitals, VAs, inpatient settings. Their research in counseling tends to focus on multicultural and social justice issues. I think we could learn a lot from our counseling friends, to be perfectly honest, because these are things we should be incorporating into clinical research, and we haven't been. So we focus on psychopathology or medical issues and how they're affected by psychological factors. And so this is looking at EdDs versus PhDs, or sometimes you'll hear these called EDDs. So EDDs are often shorter, and your focus is on practical applications of research, whereas in the PhD, you're conducting research, you are trying to get published, things along those lines. The cost will really depend on the university and your time in the program. So for example, my program guaranteed you funding for 4 years, and then your 5th year, you found something for yourself. Other programs might not have funding for all those years. People who get EDDs tend to go into administration, policymaking, leadership, or become professors themselves. And then PhDs do research, teaching at the college level, consulting, government, and again, also applied settings like a hospital or a VA. So this is an example, and this data is a little out of date. So this is from like 2011, 2004, 1998, but I just wanted to show you sort of the, I don't want to scare you guys, but just show you that these programs are competitive. There's a nice way to put it. So this would be like per program, the average PsyD might get somewhere between 150 and 310 applications. Balanced PhD programs and those clinical science programs, about the same amount. University-based PsyDs versus professional schools are different. So there are these professional schools that kind of just do PsyDs and masters. They often charge more, so that's something to look into. And so you'll see the acceptance rates for PsyDs are actually pretty good, right? And especially like for the professional schools, they take half their applicants. These are now high in terms of percentage for getting into a PhD. I think now the average is like 5% or under. And again, this is not meant to scare you, just show you the reality of the market, unfortunately. And so you see who offers tuition remission, they pay for your tuition, who offers you assistantship with money, and then who is offering both. And so especially those science-based PhD programs are very likely to pay for everything for you. And you can see when they looked at it in 2011, 99% of those programs did that, right? And you can see these freestanding professional schools, they're not giving you any money. And how many years does it take to get your degree? PsyDs are about 5, and then PhDs are about 6 because you're spending more time doing research. And then this is their match rate with those internships you have to do for the last year to get your PhD. And so you see that PhD programs do have slightly better match rates. So I thought I would walk you all through some of the programs in our area. That being said, especially if you're applying to a doctoral program that's research-based, you don't want to limit yourself geographically. What you want to do is say, what do I want to do research in? And where are those people, right? So like I applied to work with my grad advisor, basically, rather than to Kent State. So there is a consortium of clinical psychology between ODU, EVMS, and NSU. That is our only clinical PhD in the area. And they're fantastic. I know some of the folks over there. They do really great work, but they're going to be competitive. ODU offers many related PhDs. So health psych is another field to really look into. This is a lot of where the field is going, where we are working within medical settings. We're doing that research of how psychology and biology interact, right? Sometimes you're actually working in clinical settings with patients. Human factors, just to review what we talked about Wednesday, this is where you're looking at how humans and machines or humans and ergonomics interact. IO is that psychology in the workplace. Again, these two, human factors and IO, are where you make your money. I'm not poor. I just would be making probably double if I was an IO psychologist. And then, as I mentioned, you can get that PhD in education and counseling, and that is one of the top programs for that in the country. EVMS also has a doctorate in health sciences, and that's what DHSC stands for. William and Mary up on the peninsula has a PhD in counselor education and a PhD in school psych. So really interestingly, a lot of these PhDs for counselors are called something like this, PhDs in counseling education, because sort of the assumption is if you are going to get a PhD in counseling, you want to be teaching other counselors. And the same for social work, actually. So you'll see William and Mary, Regent, and Hampton. That's all what their PhD in counseling is called, is counselor education. Regent, as I mentioned, has that PsyD in clinical psych. It's certainly an option. Again, what I worry about is you all going into a lot of debt. And one thing you should know, if you do decide to go to Regent for any of your programs, is it is very religious. If you are religious, you will be fine with it, right? But if you are not, you might not enjoy that type of training. We'll just put that out there. Whereas all the rest of these are going to be pretty religion neutral, right? But they also have the counselor education and counseling and psychological studies. And then Hampton has that PhD. Hampton and Norfolk State are both historically Black colleges and universities. So it's great that they are having this graduate training. All righty. So what about master's programs? What if you think, I'm not sure if I want to get a PhD or I just want to do therapy? You probably want to go with a master's. Or you can get master's to focus in on research as well. So we currently have an MA in Human Services through some of the folks from the social work department. So that is an option. It's online. Maybe one day our MA in applied psychology will come forth. We actually are getting a hire for this because we'd like this to concentrate in industrial organizational psychology. So this might become a thing. This would also be online. ODU has the MS Ed in counseling. So that's a Master of Science in Education. And then you can get an Ed-S and being an education specialist in counseling. I do not know the distinction between those two. I'm sure their website could tell you a lot more than I could. They have a research MS in psychology. And then you can also, if you're interested in health more broadly, there's an MPH, a Master's in Public Health. And the really interesting thing is that EVMS, ODU, and NSU is going to be having an MPH soon. They're actually going to combine their MPH programs and have where you can take classes at all of them, kind of like the consortium. And NSU's, Norfolk State's MPH is going to focus on health disparities, which just like makes my heart happy. At EVMS, you can get a master's in art therapy and counseling. But they also have some of these other great ones. I actually went to an event at EVMS a couple weeks ago and learned about some of these other programs that our students might be interested in. So healthcare administration, if you're someone who wants to go on and do experimental psych, or even you're thinking like veterinary school, they said this lab animal science master's really gives you a leg up. Medical and health professions education, you can just get a master's. It's basically like a pre-med school degree, but then you also have a master's and you can get a master's in public health there as well. Regent has several masters that might appeal. So clinical mental health counseling, human services had several subspecialties. They have marriage, couple, and family counseling, just counseling. And then they had an MS in psychology with various subspecialties as well. William and Mary has an MS in psychology that's in clinical, and it's a PhD prep program, which means, again, you go, you do research, you might get a little bit of clinical training, but you're basically making your resume look better for a PhD application. And the nice thing about doing these PhD prep is that oftentimes your courses transfer. So when you get to your PhD, now you have fewer courses to take. You might be able to get out of that PhD in 4 years instead of 6. And then they have an MN at counseling, again, various subspecialties, and that is housed in their Department of Education. NSU has, starting in January, a new MS in cyber psychology. I don't even know what this is, but this sounds fun. So something to look into. And then Hampton also has an MA in various subspecialties of counseling. I did find a couple more videos because I thought the one I showed you on Wednesday wasn't that helpful for jobs with your bachelor's degree. So I did find a couple more that have things you can do with a psychology bachelor's degree, not having to do any grad school.
Hello, all you big, beautiful brains out there. Today, we're talking about 3 more jobs you can get with just a bachelor's degree in psychology. Before we get started, take a minute to subscribe to Psy vs. Psy. Help out your friendly neighborhood psychologist while I tell you all about the kinds of jobs you can get with a bachelor's degree in psychology. One of the things we can clearly see from the metrics on Psy vs. Psy is that you guys are ready to get to work. Our videos about jobs and finding your career path are some of the most successful on the channel. So, this week, we're going to give you what you want and do an updated look at a video from last year about the different types of jobs you can find with a bachelor's degree in psychology.
So if anyone
Why a bachelor's degree?
Well,
let's be bluntly honest for a minute. Most people, when deciding on a college major, are encouraged to go after their passion, not a practical career. This video is to show you psychology can be both. And since the job market isn't getting any easier, I want to show you the types of careers that are available right out of college so that you can make your best informed decision about your future. Let's get started just like last time. I entered psychology degree in the search bar of a popular career search engine for our hometown of San Antonio, Texas, and found the first 3 jobs that popped up. We're going to look at each of the jobs and why they state they're looking for psych majors. The first job I saw was at a local health organization for a position called Talent Development Consultant. The job description lists tasks like designing training programs, leading team building activities, and being able to measurably improve the performance of employees, which means this job falls firmly under industrial organizational psychology. As an IO psychologist myself, I am always here for improving people's work lives, and it's a huge area for jobs in psychology because of psychologists' research and analysis skills as well as team building abilities, both of which are specifically requested in this job ad. I was really glad to see this job in my search because a lot of incoming psych majors don't even think about careers improving the workplace. Having psychology professionals at jobs like this one could just be key to improving job satisfaction for everybody. The second job to pop up is Re-Engagement Coordinator, and that's kind of a weird name. The job is with a national nonprofit looking to reduce barriers for kids who are having a hard time attending school. So the job is really about re-engaging the kids with their education by providing students and their families with accessible resources through local programs. This job would be perfect for anyone looking to help kids and their families directly. As psych majors, this is a type of career that many people have a real passion for, and honestly, that's one of the reasons I wanted to highlight it. You don't have to get a master's degree or be a school counselor to help kids get the tools they need to be successful. Many of my
And I'll just say in general, nonprofits are a great career path for folks with bachelor's in psych. They love the training you have, and you can get involved pretty quickly as soon as you graduate.
real life students are extremely interested in helping kids, and there are jobs like this out there where you can make a real difference every day. But this job does have a downside. With the bachelor's degree minimum salary listed at $35,000, it's a practical career path, but the salary is a lot lower than most of us would expect for a college level position. This salary is probably due to the job being a nonprofit where you do generally see lower starting salaries, but remember, this is one specific job. All of the salaries out there are probably going to be more competitive. However, if it's your passion, it might be the right situation for you. Our third job is court liaison. Forensic psychology is another area students are extremely interested in psychology, but they often think that they have to get a master's or even maybe a PhD to work in the field. This job only requires a bachelor's, but does want you to have some experience with the basics of working with psychiatric patients and some knowledge about the court system. So you'd want to take advantage of every kind of experiential learning you could get through your university, or try to participate in an internship or mentorship program to be really competitive for the field. This job is through a big mental health and substance abuse center here in San Antonio. So the main goal of the position is to coordinate between clients, case managers, and the court system. Some of the main duties assigned to this job include things like maintaining court documentation for clients, providing clinical information to legal officials like the district attorney or public defenders, and working to ensure that the rights and privacy of your client are protected.
So that gives you just
Hello,
a
all you.
little bit of a feeling for it. And then, yeah, we got some time. We can watch this one as well. This is another one where they're going to talk about careers you can do with no grad school.
What is up, fam? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Phil Sarpon. This is Phil's Guide to Side D. This channel is dedicated to all things psychology, wellness, and graduate school. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about in this video today is that a lot of you guys are psychology majors and you may not know whether or not you want to go into clinical psychology. I wanted to do this video just to provide you guys some alternative options for you guys, just so you guys know what you can do with your degree in case you don't want to become a clinical psychologist. So here are some of the top careers for psychology majors after they graduate with their bachelor's degree. The first one is going to be a career counselor, which you can imagine what that is. You're basically helping students identify what type of major or what type of career field might be best for them. There's also the adoption field, which is basically working probably with licensed clinical social workers or working in some type of mental health department in terms of the adoption agency. So you may be able to do some paperwork, you may be able to do some consulting, you may be able to work with the therapist alongside various different things in relation to the adoption department. So let's say you have your psychology degree and you're trying to figure out whether or not you want to go into school psychology, maybe get a certification, or maybe go into a master's. Well, the nice thing about that is that with a master's or with a certification, you could work in educational settings as a psychologist, perhaps doing some school-related testing or working with some children in terms of counseling and so forth. Another thing is SEO marketing. You know, one of the things that I've heard about a lot of companies and organizations doing is really actually including some psychology departments within their company. So a lot of times these agencies will hire in psychology majors or neuroscience majors to be able to invest into that department and help them with some of the analytics of what they can do with marketing different products or marketing to different people. You could also potentially be a
For folks that have taken social psych, or if you remember social psych from intro, right? Psychology tells us how to manipulate people, right? And how to get people to buy things. And so we are very appealing.
recruiter. A lot of times schools and programs will hire a lot of psychology majors in the specific department of recruiting. And so what your task may be to do is to reach out to prospective students in high school or in other different colleges and see if there is a potential that they may want to join that university, or if there is some type of major that may be really beneficial for them. And so you may be calling these students, contacting these students, talking with them on the phone, giving them information about the school and seeing whether or not it's going to be a good fit for them to come to the school. Another option is a marketing consultant. And again, this goes back to some of the things that I've talked about with some of the companies, really including some neuroscience or psychology departments within their field to help with some of this marketing or advertisement field. And so as these companies grow larger or want to grow larger, they will definitely invest in a lot of people who may be psychology majors who can contribute to this aspect of their company. Now, one of the things that I've talked about too is that psychology majors can definitely go into business. One of the things about business is using psychology related topics to help whatever type of department. And so a lot of psychology majors will actually funnel themselves into different types of businesses. And maybe over time, as they climb the ladder, they can actually become a CEO of the company, or maybe go into more of the management side of the business because they understand a little bit conceptually what it means in terms of people, interactions. Another huge thing that you can do as a psychology major is definitely go into research. One of the things about psychology schools and programs and doctors of psychology is that they're always looking for assistants to help them with research. And so if research is your jam, you like writing papers, you like conducting experiments and going to research labs and so forth, then using your psychology major to perhaps apply to different research related fields might be really beneficial. And I'm sure there's even a lot of companies and organizations that are hiring a lot of psychology majors to help them specifically with the research side. You can also go into different departments that deal with social workers helping children or families with different social mental health related concerns. And so as a psychology major, you may be able to become a social psychology assistant or work in social psychology or even social work departments so that you can actually help people specifically. Now, you won't be able to do therapy or individual therapy or counseling or anything like that, but you may be able to work with some of the paperwork, you may be doing some of the assisting, but there's actually a lot of things that you guys can do as assistants to psychologists, social workers, and clinicians themselves. Talent acquisition is basically all about the human resources department. So essentially every organization is probably going to have some type of human resources department. This is great for psychology majors because when you go into these departments and you are not only just working with the business side, but you are also working with the psychology side. You're making sure that people in the workplace feel safe. You're making sure that there's rules and regulations and principles to make sure that there isn't any types of discrimination, that basically when it comes to hiring practices, that everything is ethical. I mean, there's a lot of weight and energy and importance in making sure that it is a good human resources department to make sure that companies are straight. And so I think it's really a good idea to look into some human resources positions with your psychology major, because most
So that just gives you,
like-
again, a couple more options in terms of what can you do with the bachelor's, right? If you don't want to go do a master's right away or wherever, that's fine too. So, that's the end of our lecture stuff for the year. On Monday, like I said, I'll distribute exam 4. So be here in person, folks who are on Zoom. Thanks to everyone who came in person today. And we'll also answer questions about logistics coming up for next Friday. Alrighty, everybody have a great weekend.